My guest today is Christina McMurray. She is the author of Live, Laugh, Fly, a family journey through childhood cancer, unimaginable grief, and the realization that love never dies. Chris, it is so good to have you on the latest version. You've written a book about your family's experience with your son, Scott, who, when he was 19, was diagnosed with a very rare type of cancer. Tell us about Scott.
Scott. Just saying his name makes me smile, which is just such a joy. He just was the most interesting person I've ever met, because even though I could try to be 5 steps ahead of him, I never could be. He was sweet. He was impulsive. He was funny. He was kind. He made us laugh. He made everybody laugh. And he had so many friends, and he taught me so much. He taught me so much about myself, about life. It was an honor to be his mom. It really is.
Wow. Your book, I was really surprised by your book because it's really in 3 parts. You have the story about your relationship with your husband, Gene, the early years of your marriage, then your experience raising Scott and going through his illness and passing. And then you have a 3rd part, which is kind of the unexpected part. But I want to start with the early days because, you know, when we talk about the latest version and how we as women have many different parts to our lives and we pivot from one thing to another. But I want to give kudos to Gene because he has done something remarkable as well that I think really he deserves a tremendous amount of credit. And you do too, for writing so honestly about his years of addiction, but also recovery and coming back. And it was the unexpected part of your story. And I should say, we know each other. We were, friends at our Presbyterian church in Westchester County, New York. And you guys were just a nice church family with kids. You and Gene were youth group leaders. And so just to show how you don't know everything that's going on in someone's life or has gone on in someone's life, can you tell us a little bit about those early years?
Yeah. I was 21 years old when I met Gene, and he was 29. So we have close to an 8-year difference in our relationship. And I had no idea what an alcoholic was. I wasn't raised around it. And in my mind, it was just somebody laying on the street. And that was what an alcoholic was. I didn't know that it's somebody who I could love, who was funny, who was kind, but they had a drinking problem. I didn't know that. And we went through the first rehab when we were dating. And again, I didn't really understand all about it. And coming from the background I did, it wasn't really talked about. I came from a very strict Bronx Italian household. So it was more of like, they wanted me to just end things, with him. But it's just very difficult. So we did go through that, and then he had stopped drinking for a little bit, and then we had our children, and you have some of the ups and downs, but then, that started again. And at this point, I had found a support group for women, for anybody who loves a family member with the disease. And I was learning more about it and also learning how to set up boundaries for myself, which is something I never did, but then after, I think like the third, I went through 3 rehabs with him, and my children are younger and growing up. And then the last time when he told me about a serious drug addiction, there was no hesitation. And it was just like, you need to leave.
Wow.
And my children were 4 and 6 at the time.
Wow.
And I was very scared because I had never been on my own, but now I'm on my own with 2 small children. But I also knew that I didn't want them raised in an environment of instability like that. And so I asked him to leave, and thank goodness he did. He did. And he made his way eventually out to California, where he had close family members who had been in recovery. And he had went there, and we didn't have contact with him for years.
Wow.
My children never had the Disney dream of, our parents will get back together. They never did. I continued working and doing the daycare and doing the best I can.
So you were actually divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and then you started your at-home childcare business.
Well, I had started the daycare business when Kim was 4 months old.
Oh.
I used to be a diet technician, and I was actually working at a rehabilitation center for stroke victims and other in White Plains. And then after she was born, I did not want to go back to that setting because you have to work on weekends, holidays. And I started watching one little girl. And Kim was 4 months old and she was 14 months old. And then it just kind of grew from there. I always knew I wanted to be at home, with my kids. And this was the perfect solution for me.
So you really became a business owner. You were running this business in your house. You were on your own. So you were responsible for everything.
For everything. I didn't receive... Well, Gene and I were divorced for 8 years. I would say the first 5 years, I never received child support or alimony. So all the work I was doing all of that. But, I was happy to, because as long as I could work, I knew it would be okay. And I loved what I was doing. I loved being around kids, and I was able to be home with my kids. So I used to just pray for strength every day, because I figured if I'm strong, then I can work and everything else will fall into place, and it did.
Yeah.
It did.
But you started having some back issues at some point, right? And you were facing some serious surgery.
Yeah, that was, I was having back trouble because lifting 2 babies always at a time on my hip. Where I lived was very hilly, so pushing the double stroller with 3 babies in it. So I had some bouts of where I would just kind of collapse. Mm-hmm. Then they'd get me to a hospital. I was able to get muscle relaxants and kind of be on my way. But after a couple years of that, after the last bout, the doctor was like, I'm risking paralysis. I need to have the fusion surgery. Yeah. So that was a big decision. Wow. Because it was closing a 20-year business. And with that is your identity, too.
Of course, because you derived so much strength from that, from building up your business and supporting your kids. And so many women can identify with that that identity of being the provider and, really your whole kid's world. It's really, remarkable. And then at some point, Gene comes back into your life.
Yeah, he came back before the surgery, thank goodness, because I didn't even have health insurance on myself, so I never would have had that. He came back into our lives, I would say, 1999 or so, or 98. After he got sober, he started to make phone calls to the kids, and he was kind of reestablishing a relationship in that way. The kids went out to see, he had been sober for a little bit, and the kids went out to California and spent a week with him, and they had such a great time, which was nice. And then one day he called, and he had started to send some money also. And so that was good. And I could see that he was trying and everything. And then after he had a couple years of sobriety, he had called and said that he was going to be moving back into the area so that he could be a part of the kids' life. And I was not happy at first. I mean, honestly, it was a scary thing. And I felt like, he's treading on my stuff now. I did all this, and now he's going to, be doing that too. But, this is what was best for the kids also, to have that relationship. So he did. He moved to Yonkers when he first came back, and he lived there, and he was able to go to kids' games, and he was able to be a part of their life, which was real good.
And when we look back on it now, thank goodness he was back. And let me just say, Gene is a great guy.
Yeah.
Gene is a great guy. And it is so encouraging to see this story and the arc it has, because for so many people, it would stop when Gene went away. And then, for so many families, that person never comes back. But Gene comes back and is there for you when you needed your surgery and you had to close your business. Is that right?
Well, what happened was he came back and he was, establishing relationship with the kids. And I was just cordial at that point. I was kind of cordial. I still had some anger issues with him that hadn't been resolved. And then one day we were all at Scott's game, baseball game. And I saw our daughter sit with me for like 15 minutes and then go sit with Gene for 15 minutes and that ping ponging. And I just looked at that one time and I was like, oh, no. So I called him up and I just said, we need to go and talk. You need to hear what I have to say, because I don't want to feel this way. I really don't. And I don't want the kids feeling that drawn in between. So, and actually before that, they had tried to spend an overnight with him or things, trying to establish that. And it was really on the kids' schedules of what they were comfortable with, because when he left, they were 4 and 6. But when he came back, they were 11 and 13 or so. I mean, a lot of time had passed. So, and then one time I remember saying to the kids, are you angry at Dad, for what had gone on? And they were just no, because he missed out. We had a good life. He missed out. And then that was just a turning point in how I looked at it also.
Wow, what an insight.
Happy,
what an insight that is for your children to understand that, right?
It really was. So then when we went out and we talked and I was like, how could you have done this? And we just really for hours hashed everything out and cried and, all that. But then once we did, and he asked for forgiveness and truly wanting forgiveness, and I did, I felt 1,000 pounds lighter also. And then from that moment, once we were able to forgive, then I could be in the same room with him. And then the next thing I know, I'm laughing again. And then the next thing after that, I'm like, oh, I think I'm falling in love with him again, and it was scary. And I didn't really tell anybody because I didn't want people saying, you're crazy. And again, it was that another leap of faith to take. And so then the 4 of us went and eloped at Hitchcock, and then the 4 of us went on a honeymoon to Vermont. And that was in 2000 that we did that. And then I had to close the business in 2006. It was, or 2007, I think. And
so you closed the business, you had your surgery, Gene is back in your life, and then the other shoe falls.
Yeah, I had the surgery in September. I got out of the body brace that they put on for that in March. And then Scott got sick the following December. He started complaining about, a neck or his back. But then January 1st was when he went to the hospital. And again, I mean, the timing is just amazing on it.
Yeah. You had a long 3 years with Scott. He was diagnosed with a very rare type of cancer that only affects 200 people in the country. And yet Scott was one of them. And a long, painful treatments. For a little while there, he looked to be in remission. He had come home from college. Was that his freshman year, the Christmas break, when he was starting to feel not so well?
Yeah, he came home the Christmas break. And we were actually getting ready to go to church for Christmas Eve. And he was like, Mom, do you have a belt? And I noticed, he was always thin. He was 6'2", and he weighed 175. So he was always thin, but healthy looking. And when he asked for that belt, I noticed, wow, he's thin. But he's not a great eater, and he's away at school. And so I'm just thinking, that's just it. And then the New Year's Eve, he started really complaining of his neck hurting. And I do whatever, a parent does for that part at 19 years old. Well, are you going to go out? That's like a real test, And he's like, yeah. And so I just kind of gave him a couple aspirin and he went out, and we were really comfortable that night because where the party was, all the kids were staying. So I was just like, all right, he's good. We had pizza before. Kim was good. She was doing hers. So we went to the movies with Jean's sisters and saw Juno. That would always be my last normal night there. And it was New Year's Eve of 2007 going to 2008. And then the next morning, he called at about 6 a.m. to say if I could come pick him up. He doesn't feel good. So I went and I picked him up. And again, the way he's moving in the car with that neck, and I just said, you know what? It's the emergency room. Let's just go. You probably need a muscle relaxant. You were pledging some fraternities. Let's just go. And thinking again, he's going to say, no, I just want to go to sleep. And he was just like, okay. So I'm like, oh, he doesn't feel good. So brought him in, and then just test after test. To their credit, they didn't make me worry that day too much. They wanted to keep him. They did see some masses in his lungs, but we weren't sure if it was a pneumonia type. They did an MRI on his neck. They showed some trauma. Again, they're not really knowing what it is. So they decided to keep him overnight and really didn't raise a lot of flags with us. And then the next day is when all the other tests were coming in.
Yeah, a 19-year-old with cancer, who believes it and who understands it, and there's just nothing anyone can say to you that makes it better or makes anyone really understand why that happens.
No, and I did realize after then we had transferred to a children's hospital at Montefiore, and I would get to know the other mothers there too, and not one of us, when we brought our kids to that emergency room, it ever crossed our mind of cancer. If someone's leg hurts, would you really think that's a bone cancer? You as a mom, you just don't think that. So you are blindsided with it, but you have to just do what's right for your child.
You have this great picture on the cover of your book of Scott going skydiving, and you have to explain to us what that picture is all about.
Oh, I love that picture. It's here in the office as I'm looking at it too. When he got into remission, he couldn't do it during treatment because of blood clotting. So, but right afterwards, there was a woman at the hospital, Sandy Candy, who ran the Pinwheel Project. And they give gifts to kids and try to make, do what a child would like after you have like a bone marrow or a stem cell. They may decorate their whole room because the child is in the hospital for about a month at that time. And Scott being on the older end of it, at 19, it was like, they're not going to decorate his room in a princess castle, or anything like that. But what would he like? And then she had a connection with Skydive the Ranch in New Paltz.
Wow.
And she said, do you think he would like that? And I'm like, oh, I know he would like that. So me and Jean drove him up there, and we sat on the chair, and we see him take off, and it was like, what color is his, and they tell us, and then you see him flying down. And then they made a movie of it, a video for him, because you don't see what's going on, and then you just see him coming down. And they made this video, and we looked at it, and it was like, there's his smile. We hadn't seen that smile in like a year, and it was beautiful, And then we just said, I'm like, do you want to enroll in the classes? And he did. And so I enrolled him in the classes, and whenever we could, I'd drive him up to New Paltz, and he went into the classes, and he would jump out of planes, and he ended up jumping 15 times.
Wow. I don't know many parents, of course, he's a 19-year-old, who would allow, some kid who is, getting treatment for cancer to go skydiving.
Yeah.
But then again, why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
I couldn't wrap him in bubble wrap, which is, I would have loved to, but, I couldn't. And I had to really learn how to let it go and to take that step back. Because as a mom, especially, you want to do everything for them. Make sure they don't get hurt. Make sure this, make sure that. But Scott was going to do it his way. And after some headbutting on his way, I just decided I need to just make sure I'm standing next to him during all of this. And whatever time he has left, he was handed really a terminal illness from the time he was 19. We didn't have expectations that we knew it was going to come back, and we knew, our time is limited. And we wanted him to just love his time that he has.
Wow.
And he drove across country too.
Yeah.
I mean, he did. That was nuts, but he did it. So many things he did.
And his doctors supported his adventures, didn't they?
Yeah, I thought, at least on that one, it's better for the doctors to say, no, Scott, you can't do that, than for me to say that. So when he said he was driving across country, I'm thinking, all right, I'm just not going to say anything. The doctors will tell him he can't do that. And then they were like, that's great. Yeah. We'll work out where you can mail his medications. And I'm like, okay, so I guess that's what we're doing. And I'm so glad he did it, and we would be in contact. Where are you going to be in 2 days? And that's where we would mail medication. So in a way, we were able to keep track of him, and he had his freedom. And it was amazing. I thought that trip was just going to be to Florida, because I heard him talking to his friend about a road trip, and I'm here in some southern states. I'm like, oh, Florida, that's not bad. 2 days, we'll go to Disney World. And then when he was like, no, I'm driving to California, it was like, what? Okay. All I could do was stand next to him and applaud and support,
Wow. I started out saying your book has 3 parts. And the third part is really, to me, the most remarkable. Your book doesn't end when Scott passes away. Your book,
no.
Because there's more to that story. And this is the really remarkable thing. Can you tell me a little bit about your experiences after you have a very moving description of the morning Scott passed away. He passed away at home. Mm-hmm. But there were certain things that you felt that maybe Scott was still with you in some ways. Can you just kind of describe some of your experiences?
Yes, yeah. It was a short time after he passed, not even a week. And I remember I was sitting on the front porch, which was all I was able to make it to for a while, was just that front porch, me and the dog. And I remember sitting there, and it was a beautiful day. It was probably 80 degrees or so. It was a beautiful May day. And I'm on the porch, and I remember just crying and saying, are you there, Scott? Are you there? And I would say it out loud, are you there? And this cold wave, it was just like this cold that I even shivered, came all down. And it wasn't in my body. It was in the air, a cold air, all just enveloped me. Mm. And I remember shivering and then being like, is this you, Scott? Is this you? And I didn't want to say anything to anybody, because I think my family was so worried about me anyway, with grief. And so I didn't say anything. And I just kept that to myself. And then I would know, and then, we had the whole thing, the bird's nest, a couple days later after that, and which was so amazing that for all those years, I always put my houseplants onto the porch. And then after Scott had passed, and again, it's within just a short time, a couple weeks, and I'm sitting there with a large Labrador, and this bird is right in a plant next to me. And it's sitting there, and it made this beautiful nest, and then had 3 beautiful eggs in there. And it was I'm watching her, the mother bird, and it was just amazing that she didn't fly away with this dog or me. And it was kind of this unspoken agreement, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll just kind of coexist on this porch. And then I watch, and and there was 3 eggs that had popped up. I think, and then one egg did not make it, and we put that in the garden, but the others had made it. And it was so interesting because, it started with 4 eggs, and then there were 3 eggs. And I watched her as the eggs, cracked, as the beaks were up looking at her. I watched her get food. I watched her teach them to fly and fly off. And then that 1 egg was there. Wow. And I put it in the garden then. And I remember Scott's nurse came that night for dinner, and I was telling her all about it. And she goes, well, that's the way it is. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, well, there were 4 of you and now there's 3. And you could see that connection. I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
And when you look at that nest, it's got a blue ribbon all through it. And it gave me so much hope, that nest. It just was such a beautiful experience to just see that. And still, I'm not thinking anything, I'm kind of just like, wow, that's really cool, but I'm not putting so much together of signs or anything, but I'm starting to notice. And every time that I would cry out for him, there was always a sign immediately to show that he was there, and it was every time I cried out. And it was so funny at one point that I said, I'm having more contact with you now than your first semester at college, But I would just write down the sign so I don't forget it. And then 2 years later, I was boarding a plane to New York to help at my friend's farm. And I sit down next to a woman, you make the small talk, and then she just says she's going to Maine for energy healing, and I'm, going to New York. And then she started asking about my children and if I have any. And that's always a hard question, because if I don't say Scott, then I apologize in my head. If I do, I run the risk of her being uncomfortable. But I decided to tell her. I said, I have a son, but he passed away 2 years ago. And she just said, your son, is he a writer? Are you a writer? And she just kept asking, and finally she told me she was a medium, and he's been sending me signs to show I'm supposed to write a book to help other grieving families.
Wow.
And I believed her. She said a lot of things that nobody would know.
Wow.
And the signs were there, and so I did.
It's amazing. So tell me about your experience writing the book, because so many people think, I'm going to write a book about this, but it's not easy to write a book.
I'll never do it again, too. So it was hard. I'm not a writer. I take care of kids, I'm not a writer. But what happened was I started with the signs, because that's where we were going with it. But in order to understand where my faith is then with how it started to grow, like with the signs, I had to go back to the past. And that had to include my early life with Gene and those struggles and just everything that led us up to that point. And so that's where I started it, was where I met Gene, because to me, that is really where I feel like my life began.
Sure. And how long did it take you to write?
It took 7 years to write, because I would start writing, but then the memories would become so painful that I'd be ugly crying. It was terrible. I would have to put it away for months at a time. And then when I felt strong enough, I'd see it in that drawer and I'm like, all right, let me go back to it. And so I would keep doing it. And the signs kept coming, so I'm like, okay, I guess. And every time I thought, okay, the book is done now. No, it's not. Something else just came that, I'd have to write about.
You have an interesting memory of Scott when he was maybe 3 or 4, and you ask him, what's he going to be when he grows up? And he has an interesting response to that.
Yeah, he was probably about 8 or 9 at that time. The daycare's in full swing. And always after school, I would get the after school kids. And we would always have snack, and I would initiate a topic of conversation, as all the kids sitting at the table. And just one is, what are you going to be when you grow up? And, a lot of the little boys, I'm a policeman, I'm a fireman, a teacher, all of, that. And it comes to Scott's turn. And he looks at me and he says, I don't picture myself growing up. And I'm like, Scott, how could you say that? And he's like, no, I don't picture myself growing up. I can't picture that. And I said, well, I think you'd be a great teacher. And we kind of just left it at that. But that conversation I do think about, because his cancer is a DNA-based cancer, they said. And so I always wonder, was there something inside of him that knew? Because Scott, our biggest argument with Scott of him growing up was, think about tomorrow, think about the consequences, you know? And he would actually say, present Scott cannot worry about what future Scott does. I mean, like, I don't know how a child thinks like that, but he did. He never thought of himself in the future. It was always just that day. And as a parent, it's so frustrating. But I realize now that was his saving grace too.
Wow.
Because he didn't worry about this, you know, even in treatment. It was always just today.
I'm kind of speechless at all of that, because that was one of the things that yeah, you know, there are all these things we wonder about and think about and don't really have answers to. You have all this, you talk about all the signs, and you have some interesting connections to Beatles songs that you've, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. What a great blessing that was. I was always a Beatle fan. So was Gene. And growing up, I always just played the classic rock and roll for the kids and stuff. And Scott really, really identified with the Beatles, especially John Lennon. You know, he just really loved him. And one thing in the hospital that was so cool was that but right before his stem cell transplant, he has like 3 days to be on medications. So we had his laptop, and Yoko Ono had made a lot of home movies to John's music. And so it was so cool because you could see their interactions along with the music. And we would watch these videos for hours and just talk about the Beatles and the lyrics and everything. And one day when he was sleeping, I made my way down to the social worker and I said, do you know what Yoko Ono's address is? And boom, she pulls it up instantly. And so while he's sleeping, I just wrote her a letter thanking her for putting all this music together, because how cool that I can bond with my son over music at 19 years old. Usually, you know, parents are like, what are they listening to? You know, but this was just such a great bonding experience. So I wrote her that letter thinking nothing. It was just a letter of gratitude. And then like a year later, she sent an autographed picture of her and John that's sitting up in the bed, and to Scott, and wrote this beautiful note.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it was just so cool. And we always did like our volunteer services when we always volunteered, and we always, you know, take a sad song and make it better, you know, and we would do that. And really let it be became one of our mantras, because we don't know what's going to happen, you know, and we just have to let it be. And so we still do. And
you, places where you go, you happen to hear those songs on the radio, you know, over the sound system, in a taxi cab. That's such an interesting connection to have.
And that was in Costa Rica, and it was our first Christmas without Scott. And I knew I had to get away and away from New York and just be away. I didn't know how I was going to handle our first Christmas without him, but I knew I was going to be far away. So Scott had taught me how to use the internet. I never knew how to do it. Well, now I'm typing on just like volunteer destinations at Christmas where it's warm, and all this stuff pops up, and all of a sudden I see volunteering with the turtles, a turtle conservation in Costa Rica. The next thing I know, bam, I'm pressing. Next thing I know, I had us all signed up. So Gene's watching a Yankee game in the living room, and I had booked us a Costa Rican, you know, turtle conservation. I'm like, now I got to go tell them what I did. So I go out there and I'm just like, guess what we're doing, you know, this Christmas, saving the turtles. And it was an amazing week. It really was. And on the way in the cab, we're headed to a hotel after it was all done. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, Scott, you would have loved this. You would have loved this. So many times I just will talk in my head to him. I'm like, you would have loved this. And literally after I had said that, in this Spanish-speaking taxi, Hey Jude comes on with Take a Sad Song and Make It Better.
Oh,
and
my
I
gosh.
know that's him. I know that's him.
That is amazing. You know, your experience with Scott was so different from the experiences that a lot of people are having in this age of COVID. You had a long time to understand, to process what was happening, what was going to happen. You were close to him. He died at home. You were near to each other, watching movies together. You think about people who are taken away suddenly. They die alone in a hospital. Is there something you can say or offer to folks who are grieving in this very different way?
It is, and you know, I think of that often. And if I'm to say I am lucky that he had cancer, it sounds weird to say that, but I am, in that we knew and we had that chance to say goodbye. And so I am lucky in that way. Our end versions are the same, of trying to have a life without somebody you love. But the process, I feel I am luckier than people who have gone through a sudden death. You know, I am, and I acknowledge that. But I also know that in the end process, they are with us. They are with us, and they're watching us, and they're guiding us in a way also. And they want us to talk to them. They want us to remember, and to remember the good.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I laughed after Scott died, and I felt guilty. I felt guilty. How could I laugh? My son is gone. How could I laugh? So that first time that you do laugh and you do find that joy, you have to realize they want you to. Yeah. They want you to. They don't. He would say to me, "You're my biggest worry. You're my biggest worry. I need you to be okay." And they all do. That's what love is. You know, we want them to be okay, and they want us to be okay.
Chris, I can't thank you enough for sharing your experience with us. And this has been just such a powerful conversation. I hope everyone who listens to this takes something away that is life-affirming and joyful, and there's just something very deep in what you've been able to share with us and through your book. And let me just tell our listener that Live, Laugh, Fly by Christina McMurray can be purchased on Amazon. And she also wants us to say that a portion of the proceeds will benefit pediatric cancer organizations, which is a very generous thing. Christine, thank you so much for being on the latest version. And,
thank you for having me.
And I wish you and Jean and Kim all the best, and, long and happy life to all of you.
Thank you so much. I hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Take care, Chris.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.